Alright, so part 2. Yesterday I released a video tackling the topic of video game review propaganda. The main point was that there is an exchange of access hinging on higher scores and particular phrasing within mainstream and many independent review sources as well. A quick summary: user reviews and critical reviews are almost never even close to one another. There are a bunch of reasons for this, but one very important one is the expectation and unspoken agreement that insider access is only granted to sources that large publishers and game development companies view to be safe, reliable, and profit-friendly. Thus, in order to maintain these connections, which translates to views, clicks, and monetary gain, reviewers must structure their feedback in a way that is pro-corporate agenda and not necessarily made to benefit the consumer. The second portion of this, and the darker half behind the statement, video game reviews are now just propaganda, is political bias. Not only are reviews completely divorced from the original goal and concept of providing consumers with information to better inform purchasing, having been demented into what can now only be described as an insider circle jerk in most cases, they also very frequently are laced with a political stance that is being pushed onto their audience. Even further, the gaming news industry quite often now resorts to controversial angles with the sole intention of provoking click revenue by antagonizing particular gamer groups, instead of providing an actual gameplay-oriented review. The most poignant example of this, and also the most recent one I will discuss in this video, is Eurogamer. Eurogamer, as the name obviously suggests, is an outlet centered around video games that provides articles, walkthroughs, release dates, etc., and a plethora of other video game related topics to its viewers. However, it does not stop there. They recently fired off a tweet in response to a viewer asking why they could not just simply stick to video games and leave politics out of it and not be activists, with the simple word pairing of "no, sorry." There are an infinite number of things that they could have said but intentionally landed on no, which confirms through denial that they are in fact self-recognizing activists. Now, having some sort of political bias is almost guaranteed. It's practically unavoidable at this point. Everything we do has some sort of bias incorporated, at the very least from an unconscious perspective. But this statement goes beyond the inherent bias of natural content and breaches the barrier of self-proclaimed activism. Activism is not only bias, it is bias with a conscious mission, and that mission is to sway or manipulate an audience towards a certain perspective. There is nothing wrong with being an activist. Activist communities historically have affected both positive and negative change across the globe. But when a media company that reviews products has deteriorated to the point of self-proclaimed activism, that is something the community should be aware of. I'm not saying that they should cancel the production of gaming information entirely. That would be idiotic, since there is obviously still an audience for their particular political activism within the gaming community in and of itself. But what I am trying to do is highlight that average consumers whose primary concern is to gather information about their favorite hobby should be aware of the current landscape and understand fully that most gaming news outlets and media sources are producing agenda-laced propaganda that has almost zero tie whatsoever to consumer interests. For another example, let's recall Far Cry 5, a successful game by and large, with healthy reviews, well-rounded sales, and positive reception. Well, the game also has a thinly veiled political stance. In fact, it's not even thinly veiled, it's just right there in the open. The thing is, the primary focus was clearly the gameplay. As a result, as far as I was able to find, the game did not get raked over the coals for being too political or pushing an agenda, despite the fact it features, for instance, a corrupt politician whose goal is to make Hope County great again. Pretty obvious reference. Still, the game was widely accepted as successful because the story as a whole was not corrupted by the pursuit of an excessively targeted political message that would try to sway its audience, and thus become invasive and problematic. It took a few shots here and there at different topics, but the majority of the game was about player experience. Like we discussed, most if not all media has some sort of political influence. Far Cry 5 was a good example of it being visible, but not catastrophic to the overall game and narrative. Well, how did mainstream gaming review media receive it? It was mixed, sort of, but the main complaint echoed far and wide was that the game was not political enough. Many mainstream outlets were expecting a countryside massacre in which Trump supporters were the enemy, conservative values were demonized, and the campaign painted a glorious picture of liberal agendas conquering the vile denizens of the backwards Christian extremist cult stronghold. Well, that's not what they got. The game's narrative had small references, some very on the nose, but the focus was on the world, player choice, and overall gameplay instead of pushing a blatant agenda. Many game review outlets despised this, being, after all, activists and not reviewers. As a result, the focus of their various articles was how the game didn't send a strong enough message, with lines like, Ubisoft spent months hinting at a political message that's at odds with the game's actual plot, at a time when people are desperate for stories that will help make sense of contemporary America. What? Gamers aren't desperate for stories that will help make sense of contemporary America. That's not even close to what gamers want. In this case, that's what liberal activists wanted and didn't get. So their entire review is just shaming a game that was relatively good for not being political propaganda, because they themselves are blatant political propaganda. Like it or not, mainstream video game review outlets have a very large audience. A lot of comments on my previous videos tend to say, who even takes them seriously, or you're late to the topic, they have been a joke for years, this is old news, and those comments are partially correct. Yes, the trend has been around for quite some time. Yes, I am not the tip of the spear or the edge of the knife on the issue, but these sites like Eurogamer or The Verge or Polygon, they have very large audiences, and those viewers may not be fully aware of these agendas. Since these sites have such large followings and are quite closely connected to publishers through insider access and mutual understandings, in order for publishers and game developers to appease the political activists that are quite vocal most of the time, that control a big checkpoint when it comes to information dispersal, they will sometimes adjust their development tactics and incorporate narratives that they believe may benefit their product based on the surrounding political activism. Enter Battlefield 5. Battlefield 5 is the perfect example of a company building a game around political agendas because of the contemporary atmosphere in the industry. Now, that's not to say the gameplay itself is bad. From what I've seen and played, it's fine. It's got cinematic moments, it's got decent gunplay, but the trailer, the marketing, the response from executives with quotes like gamers are ignorant and if you don't like it, don't buy it, all of that is what kneecapped the game and irreversibly damaged its launch and subsequent success. The thing about Battlefield 5 is that they could very easily have avoided these problems had they made one simple change to their marketing tactics. Had they said, this is Battlefield 5, it's historical fiction and it's our take on a fantasy World War II environment where we have built a series of untold stories inspired by true events but diverse in cast, with mechanics and gameplay as a primary focus. If they had said something like that, instead of touting it as the most immersive Battlefield yet, and trying to tread the line of historical accuracy, claiming that if you don't know about the British frontline amputee commando women, you're ignorant, well, the game would have faced not nearly as many issues. Instead, the game catered to political activism rather than actual players. And the truth of the matter is, gamers by and large are not avid political activists. They just want a quality game that lives up to its marketing and doesn't drag them over a bed of nails to get their money's worth or have fun. And they also, by and large, are not really receptive of having political agendas shoved in their face. Games are often an escape from reality. Not many people play so that they can be told that they suck, that their politics are bad, and that they need to change because they are what's wrong with the world. Political expectations in gaming run deep. You have a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, with its first poster release being criticized for, at a glance, not appearing to display strong female outlaws, despite it being a near silhouette image and having no further information, and they didn't know about Sadie Adler at that time, so I bet they feel stupid. But that's reasonable, right? Go straight to the hardcore criticism and the political activism. You also see examples like Call of Duty World War II, which was raked over the coals pre-release and essentially forced to include an artificially shoehorned in checklist, and then when the game released with that diversity checklist implemented, it was ridiculed and shamed as shallow, tokenistic, and whitewashing. Political activists get clicks by being controversial. Controversy in general gets a lot of traffic, I can personally attest to that, but reviews are not inherently meant to be controversial. They can be, but when discussing a game with the intention on dispersing information so that average players can make a better and more well-rounded purchasing decision, the angle should not be a default of political activism and controversy. Everything has some sort of bias to it. Even the most objective reporting or review will have fragments of bias seep in through the cracks. But at the very least, Own your bias. I have tackled political topics in the past, and there's no pretense about it. I don't think I would even come close to the category of political activist by itself, but when you watch material on this channel, it's pretty obviously being formed through a subjective lens. However, I make every effort to base reviews around game quality and not their politics. When a game is bad, it's bad. If the monetization is greedy, it remains greedy regardless of how liberal or conservative its moral message is. A game like Battlefield 5 is not necessarily completely terrible just because it had political marketing and some blunders in the PR department. It might be, but it's not guaranteed and should not be the only focus. Likewise, a game like Far Cry 5 is not awful simply because it had a surface level stance that may not align with certain people's religious beliefs. Again, it might be a bad game, but there are so many more meaningful angles to consider. Many reviews, dare I say the majority nowadays, do not care about these concessions. Far Cry 5 didn't demonize Trump fans enough. The whole review needs to be about that, and how it doesn't take a firm enough stance and help reshape the world in a better image, because obviously all gamers are looking for their video games to give them accurate information about contemporary America. Eurogamer? They're just so far gone they are flat out stating openly they are now activists, which means when they review a game, not only is it constructed to fit a corporate profit-safe narrative so as to maintain insider connections, it is also made to sway opinions. So instead of an article which gives you the tools to better understand whether or not you want a game because it might be fun, you get something that attempts to sway opinions and manipulate you, and has also been decoupled now in two separate ways from its original design of providing consumers with holistic material to gauge their interest levels. In the end, video game news, articles, and reviews in most scenarios have implicit bias, but that bias is now turning explicit in nature, and instead of being a small fraction of the review or the article, it is the main focus. The overall message behind this two-part video series is to be aware of where you get your information from. Find multiple outlets, multiple channels, and multiple different sources, because manipulation of the review process escalates every single day. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. We have new esports merchandise that has custom gamertag, name, and number. If you're interested, there's jackets, jerseys, hoodies, etc. And we also have some communities for gamers to join, like Facebook group, Discord server, and gaming forums, as well as some other stuff, but I'll cut it there and I'll stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.